All right, well, thanks for sticking around for almost the last talk. I'm going to offer a couple different perspectives, I think. One, because I'll talk about bugs, and two, because I'll talk about cities rather than natural areas. And rock snot is a worse name than I thought I would have the kind of worst name, but I don't. Not me personally, one of my insects. Mine's, you know. All right. Oh, yeah, sure.
It's not on.
It's not, oh. I'm an extension. You'd think I would have, you'd think I'd know how to use one of these. Okay. This is better, I assume.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. You don't want to miss any of my jokes. So exotic species, as we've heard today, seem to get most of the attention and a lot of the grant dollars, and that's important because they cause an extraordinary amount of damage, and we know all about these things. Again, I think a lot about insects. And everybody seems to love native plants and native species and butterflies and things like that, right? But some of these native species actually, as we heard in one of the earlier talks with mountain pine beetle, southern pine beetle, this is the pine processionary moth. This it's a pretty nasty caterpillar in Europe. But it's geographically native to the Mediterranean region, just like the southern pine beetle is geographically native and has become a big problem. So how do we, something happened here. Well, in any case, an oak tree like this one could have thousands of herbivores. Just caterpillars on oaks is in the range of 500 species, and then you've got scale insects and mites and beetles and all these other things. How do we possibly know, even for one genus of tree, which species will be the sleeper species, right? And so the way that we've approached this in my lab is to use cities as sentinels to try and predict which native herbivores might become more abundant and damaging with climate change. And we have a paper that came out today actually about some of this review of using cities as surrogates for climate change that you can find on our website. But cities have a lot of the conditions we predict with climate change in the next 50 or 100 years. They're warmer, they have higher CO2 concentrations, and other things that we've talked about today. And often city trees have more pests than rural trees. Okay, so we put these things together, and our hypothesis has been for the last several years that the urban heat island effect is a primary driver of certain tree pests in cities, and that these pests may thrive in rural forests under climate change. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of the critters that we've been working on. This one's called the Gloomy scale, okay? That's a pretty good name, but not as good as rock snot. This is Adam Dale. He was a PhD student in my lab. He's at the University of Florida now. This is the Gloomy scale. These little bumps, they're literally bumps on logs. And this is, how dense they can become on red maples. This is a paper from 1912 that way back then identified Gloomy scale as the most important shade tree pest in North Carolina. Of course, nobody worked on it again until 2000 something. Okay, another native species, this is the oak lecanium scale. Again, more bumps on logs. These guys just drink phloem. Mostly females, these scales drink phloem. Pest of oak trees native to the US. Both of these are univoltine. This work was done by Emily Meineke. She's a postdoc at Harvard. So sentinels, cities as sentinels. I'm going to go through a couple of just examples here. How does urban warming affect scale, abundance, and fitness on urban trees? This kind of sets up the proof concept that urban warming can affect pest species. How does warming affect scale abundance in forests? And and then look at some of the distribution changes of our Gloomy scale. So the way that we approach this is we get these Landsat thermal maps, and anyone can download these. And we use these to identify hotter and cooler parts of cities. This is Raleigh. We work in other cities as well. Just for context, this is surface temperature at the Raleigh airport, which is about 10 degrees C higher than the state forest next to it. So that's the range of temperatures on this map. We get tree inventories from Raleigh and other cities, and we overlay tree inventories on top of our thermal maps. And so this allows us, these are willow oaks in Raleigh, it's the city of oaks. It allows us to find willow oaks that live in a hot environment and go very close by and find willow oaks that are living in a relatively cooler environment, all in an urban environment, though, to help us control for some of that. So just to make a long story short, and this is always sad to condense students' theses into 1 or 2 slides, but Emily found, just comparing, her hot trees to trees that were about 2°C cooler, that her lecanium scales were much more abundant on those trees. And she found higher survival and some other things, but one of the interesting things that she found, here's the life cycle of the lecanium scale. These are the females blow up into these balloons, and they're filled with about 2,000 eggs. And at this point in the life cycle, they're very susceptible to several parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs in the ovipositing female or within the egg case and consume those eggs. And so what Emily found was that scales on hotter trees, again, just about 2 degrees C hotter, the scales produced the scales started to produce eggs a couple of weeks earlier in the spring. All the parasitoids came out, though, at the time that the cooler scales started to produce eggs. And so these warmer scales had enemy-free space to produce as many eggs as they could, which tended to be almost their full complement before they were parasitized. Okay, so this is one of the ways that this scale with warming becomes more abundant, is through this disruption of this interaction. So this is Adam, he's watering this tree, and what we did with red maples, which is what the Gloomy scale feeds on, is we found pairs of trees all over the city that were in hotter and cooler locations. And to help control for the effect of drought that could also be present with hotter trees, poor Adam had to water 1 tree of each pair twice a week for years. So this is no fun, but it's very interesting. And so Adam found his scales become even more abundant with temperature. Again, 2.5 degrees of warming, and this is a log scale, so you get about 200 times more scales on the hot trees. The effect of the drought treatment became apparent when we started looking at scale fecundity. Adam figured out that these are about 1 millimeter across. He figured out he could squeeze out the embryos and count them somehow. And what happens is on, this is temperature, I get 23.5 up to 26, and on the water trees, fecundity increases with temperature. And on unwatered trees, fecundity increases temperature at the same slope, but its intercept is much higher. So on hot, unwatered trees, you're getting many more embryos than on cool water trees, which would be sort of the natural condition a tree would live in. Okay, so again, the amount of young that these are producing is contributing to their abundance because of warming. So what about natural forests, right? And we're doing more work in natural forests now that I won't talk about. Maybe next time I come out. This is Elsa Youngstead. She was a research associate in my lab. She's now an assistant professor at NC State. And what she figured out was that she could go and get these herbarium samples from all over the Southeast and still find the gloomy scale, the waxy colors that they leave behind on those herbarium specimens. And so this took forever. Elsa disappeared for a long time. You know, I don't pay a lot of attention to stuff, but she came back with this great data set on all these 300 and some herbarium samples she had looked at. And the gist of this is, of course, everybody knows that climate change is just a natural cycle. So here's the natural cycle of decadal average temperatures. And these pink ones, of course, are hotter. And a higher proportion of her specimens had scales during those hot periods, lower proportion, during cool cycles, okay, higher and lower. And so, of course, now we're kind of off the charts here. So Elsa disappeared again on another camping trip. But what she did was she went back and revisited as many of these sites as she could that were still forests and not Walmarts. And what she found was that in the 20 sites she could revisit, 16 of those she found higher scale abundance in those natural forests. In 2, it was equal, and in 2, it was declined. So in general, over the course of time, as things have gotten warmer, we have more scales. And any of the papers you see, they're all on my website. You can download them for your personal use, if you like. Okay, so finally, we've talked a lot about range shift today, and this is a pretty good indication of how warming affects organisms. And so we're doing a lot with the range of these critters now, but just kind of preliminarily, this is from that 1912 publication that I showed you, and this is the range of the gloomy scale at that time. Okay, it's a warm southern species, and here's a close-up of North Carolina. These open circles. Can you imagine drawing this thing? Is where they searched but could not find scales. All of these, they found the scales. Okay, so here's Asheville. If you've ever been there, it's very nice. And there's no scales in Asheville at the time that Metcalf did this survey. Here's Raleigh, where we work. There's lots of scales. But now, if you go to Asheville and look at the urban trees, there's lots of scales on them. Okay? And if you go outside of Asheville in the parks, I've looked and looked, and I can't find gloomy scales in the forests there. But you can in the city nearby where it's warmer. In Raleigh now, where Metcalf said, where there's always been gloomy scales, you see it in actually pretty high abundance in the forests. I mean, this is just from hiking with my kids, but we're trying to collect data on this. And so you see it in greater abundance in natural areas now than apparently you did in 1912. Okay, back to this map. We've done surveys, and some folks have sent us data from the National Plant Diagnostic Network and other places. Now we can find gloomy scale in all of these more northern places, either a lot or a little in cities. Okay, so we're working with those data also. So gloomy scale and lecanium scale have qualities with warming that make them invasive. And phenotypic plasticity, greater fecundity, range expansion, all the things we've talked about. And we've said this 1,000 times today. So